So my name is Alex Estrella. Thank you for having me on the Breaking the Biz podcast.
Stay tuned for today's episode of Breaking the Biz, an informative podcast where we dive into the world of entertainment by interviewing seasoned professionals who have made their mark in the industry. Gain invaluable insights as they share their personal journeys, offering advice on navigating the dynamic landscape of the entertainment industry. Whether you're an aspiring actor, musician, filmmaker, author, animator, or any creative soul, tune in for expert career guidance, insider tips, and first-hand accounts on breaking into the entertainment industry. Get ready to unlock the secrets behind successful careers and fuel your own passion for the limelight. Please remember to like this video and to subscribe to our channels for more great conversations.
Greetings from Breaking the Biz, brought to you by Yes I Can Unity Through Music and Education. I'm William Felber, your navigator through the intriguing universe of the entertainment industry, as revealed by the visionaries and creators who bring it to life. Stay tuned as we delve into diverse insights from the forefront of entertainment, hearing from pioneers, creators, and agents of change. Prepare for a journey filled with tales of innovation, resilience, and the undying quest for artistic brilliance.
Welcome to Breaking the Biz podcast with the Yes I Can crew. We've got a great guest with us. We have Alex Astrella, who is the creator of Blu Star Productions. He's a director, producer, filmmaker based out of Orange County. Diagnosed on the autism spectrum at the age of 2. Alex was told he would never be able to hold a job as an adult. 24 years later, Alex has won numerous awards and has gained nationwide praise for his documentary films. Finding films has helped Alex realize his purpose in life, whereas he struggled in other areas of life due to his disability. Film always remained a constant source of joy and inspiration. His affinity for serving the autism community that helped him achieve success led him to the creation of Blu Star Productions LLC. With Blu Star Productions, Alex hopes to usher in a new age of original content through empowering those gifted with a disability. Blu Star Productions serves to give a voice to artists across the disability spectrum. In creating unique opportunities for creators, our exceptional artist Blu Star Productions will foster content unlike anything seen before. From screenplays to feature-length documentaries, the community of creators will thrive in showcasing their unique perspectives on the world through their own lens. They aim to continue to build a catalog of work that stretches the boundaries. By utilizing resources to support their network of gifted creators, audiences will be spellbound by the artistry found in Blu Star portfolio. Above everything else, they are committed to providing a safe and a welcoming space for disabled artists to collaborate and learn from each other. Regardless of race, gender, and religion, they are united through the belief that accessibility takes center stage. Moreover, they hope that their community develop lifelong connections by being part of Blu Star Production family. Having harmony among artists who don't fit into any box makes the possibilities endless. I mean, what a perfect guest to have on the show. I mean, you are paying it forward for the next, group of disabled creatives and giving them a platform. So many times I hear, I don't know where to put my stuff or how do I get my start? And the fact that you were 2 and at that point, the odds of being successful, or the stereotypes. Let's go back to the stereotypes of, oh, you're not going to be successful. So to see what you're doing 24 years later and continuing to give a platform to creatives, I just have to say major kudos to you, Alex. So I'm so excited to talk to you tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the wonderful intro. I feel like very honored, humbled. Appreciate it, man.
Awesome. I love it. So I want to talk, when you were a kid, what was like the dream job? Was it an actor? Was it like, I want to be Steven Spielberg? Where did the love of film come from?
Yeah. So I remember actually, like in my fifth grade yearbook, I wrote that I wanted to be a writer. You know, everyone had their like dream goals, dream careers, and like I wanted to be a writer, and I did. I remember like through like third and fifth grade, kind of like writing. I was really into World War II at the time, so I was like writing this book, this World War II book that never materialized, rather. But yeah, that's where, you know, I've always had a creative brain. I remember when I was doing ABA therapy when I was a kid, like I would always, arts and crafts was like my favorite part, you know, and building things that didn't even exist, you know, and like lining up, you know, I'm really into trains as well. It was when I was 3, I still am at 28. And like lining up trains in different formations, and also just like, you know, creatively like thinking like, oh, this would be a route to like Delaware or something like that. So I guess like all that to say that manifested kind of into my filmmaking, and like seeing so many films, you know, in addition to already just being a creative person and having a lot of creative thoughts, like seeing so many films like throughout my childhood, like kind of influenced me. You know, when I got to college, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was undecided. And I was just like, oh, wait a second. I think it's kind of like just like, you know, this like thing that's so obvious, but you don't like, you know, see it at first. So that's where I started, you know, then I was like, okay, I'm going to just go from being a spectator to actually like making these things. And from there, yeah, it just kind of blossomed, you know.
I love it. So I want to give me 3 movies that inspired you. The 3 that you're like, okay, I want to do this.
Oh man, I mean, it's an obvious answer. Well, so I guess like my first one that comes to mind is The Godfather. Like you know, it's so funny in the Barbie movie how they're like, oh yeah, like, you know, talk about like the Godfather scene as like, it's so accurate. But like it really did. I mean, my Italian heritage, like I think played a part in that too. But I just remember seeing that movie probably younger than I was supposed to, and being like floored in a great way of like how like Francis Ford Coppola did that film. You know, just everything about it is just like flawless, like, you know, chef's kiss. And 2 others, Inglourious Bastards. You know, I've always had an affinity for like gore and just like stylized violence, but also, you know, intertwined with a really like compelling narrative. And that film did that, you know, both of those things so well. And it was kind of my introduction to Quentin Tarantino. And then more recently, I think Get Out was one of those ones. That was when I saw that right when I was kind of starting my filmmaking career. And I was like, holy crap. Like, you know, I was like 21 at that point, and I had seen so many amazing movies, but I feel like Get Out just kind of turned the horror genre on its head, if you will. And it just kind of like forged its own genre, and what Jordan Peele did, you know, kind of like proving everyone wrong that you can go from like comedy into like making horror, and really, really sophisticated horror film, like on a budget. That one just kind of like, you know, is like, okay, like that got the creative gears rolling a lot, especially being a novice filmmaker. I was like, wow, like, you know, what Jordan Peele was able to do with that and everything about that film. So those are the 3. I mean, I have so many others, but those are the 3 I say from like a creator standpoint that I've just like been, and even though I do documentaries, those ones have still been like influential in terms of like my sense of like story structure and character development and whatnot. So I'd say
those are 3 solid picks. I agree on everything you said there. So high school, let's talk high school before we get to college. High school, were you part of like a journalism class? What did you do? Creative writing? What did you do to foster that creativity in writing?
You know, I actually didn't do too much. I would say like it's interesting in high school. Yeah, you would think like I would have done journalism or, you know, a creative endeavor like that. But I saw a lot of movies, you know, and I was like not studying for AP tests or other exams. Like I just would find myself at the movie theater, and I was like, you know, very fortunate. There's a movie theater like a 5-minute drive from my house. And that was kind of like the social gathering point, if you will. We would all kind of like, you know, it was almost like a church for like us high schoolers, my high school group. You know, we would all kind of like convene and like worship the screen, if you will. And that was, yeah, so it wasn't really any classes directly. I mean, I did take a photography class, but I'll be frank, like that one didn't, that didn't give me the same inspiration as like, the movies I saw throughout high school. And, I think even some of the movies I like mentioned, weren't during that high school period, but there were still like a lot of quality movies like Argo, Lincoln that I saw during high school, which I think, also provided like a lot of inspiration too. There was, through that, I went to high school like 2010 through 2014. There's some amazing films that came out during that time. And I think also part of it too is like being in a social setting and like hearing, getting, again, kind of like this church thing. It's like we go to dinner like afterwards and discuss like, the film or the plot or like what we liked, what we didn't like, and all these different opinions. And I think that it's almost kind of like a little like writers, like a think tank, a little like writer's room, if you will, like, for high schoolers. And that was just so cool, like having that experiences. And, that's what sticks with me. So I think that, I when, jump forward to college, like I channeled those experiences, not only of like movie going, but also like the conversations in and around it. Those were some of my favorite parts of high school. So like, I'm just going to chase that,
I love it. Now let's talk about chasing the dream. You get to college and you mentioned undecided, right?
Mm-hmm.
When did you, what was the final, what did you major in, and what was the thing that pushed you in that direction?
Yeah, so I started off with being a communications major, and because, there's like some overlap, communications, like, marketing, media. But I just didn't really know like exactly, I got there as a freshman and I went to UC Santa Barbara and it's a party school. So I wanted to, I was a freshman, I wanted to party and still learn. But, at that point I was taking a lot of general ed classes and like, they weren't really pointing me in towards any direction outside of like checking off boxes, but then I think, through that time too, through college, it was it looked different, but I was also still watching a lot of films like in dorm rooms instead of movie theaters, but those same experiences. And I was very lucky. I had a lot of creative friends who weren't necessarily filmmakers, but those are early years at college. They were into music. They were into like, painting, drawing. And so I think being around that, and also taking a statistics course, which I was not a fan of, kind of redirected me towards film. And, I think part of that too is like I told like my friends who are creatives that, I had this passion for film and I used to write scripts back in, when I was in third grade and stuff. And they're like, dude, you should chase it. Like, they encouraged me. And at that point too, I disclosed them I had autism. They're like, dude, I think you could build, this is way back in the day. They're like, I think you could do something special. And here we are now. Yeah, that's kind of, I think a lot of the friends support and my parents support too, like really pushed me in that direction to thrive in film. And yeah, like I said, like, I was 10 years ago. And so it's just been, about the last 10 years, it's just kind of carried through.
I love it when you're around creative people that make you step out of your comfort zone, also foster that creativity. So that's amazing. When you were in Santa Barbara, did you feel you had to mask your autism? Or, like obviously you mentioned Santa Barbara is a party school. I'm imagining maybe early on in life didn't really have that party atmosphere. Was it easy to connect into that party group and, to talk me through college, just that experience alone?
Yeah. I mean, to answer the first part, like it was not easy to acclimate. I mean, college, I would say was never rough where, like high school was definitely, I think I had to mask it a lot more in high school, just for obvious reasons. Like, but when I got to college, I still definitely, I think a big thing, and that's, a lot talked about a lot in the autistic space. A big thing is, like sex, especially in a dorm setting and stuff. And it's like, all my buddies are talking about like sexual encounters and hooking up and stuff. And I'm just like not familiar with that at all, not comfortable talking about it at all. And, being in settings where it's like, oh, dude, you gotta make a move. And it's just like, no, I can't, and then so, but like at the same time, like masking that, like being, people, these guys who are like kind of encouraging me, like they don't know that I'm autistic and that I've had like this kind of social anxiety throughout my life. And just I've never been like good at talking to, I've never been a ladies man. I still am not. But I mean, that's just one experience, right? There's like, other, drinking, smoking, a bunch of other things that again is, unusual. It's not really talked about because, I think like people with autism, you don't think about like, but it's everybody does it, it's not just like, oh, yeah, alcohol discriminates against people with autism. Like, no. But, it put me in like kind of social, predicament sometimes where I was like, yes, I don't want to like kill the vibe or, kill the mood or whatever, but I also want to, be wary of my own boundaries and not, not get too far out of my comfort zone. So, but, I mean, that's the negative. And that honestly didn't last very long because it took me about not even a year really, where I found my group and I found I was able to like disclose them, which I never did to any of my friends in high school. It was only in college where I felt, more comfortable at that point, like telling people that I was autistic. And someone were like, oh, we had our suspicions, like they were like, we were close enough at that point. We were joking about it. And then others were like, oh shit, like, thank you for like revealing that. And so I think consoling in them, confiding in them rather, that like built up. So if there were like scenarios where there were uncomfortable parts, like they knew like, oh, Alex has to step out or whatever. And like, I just found, I've always been in a good way weird, and so a lot of my friends are weird, like, musicians and artists in general, like are weird. And so I think they just embraced, that, like autistic part of me and, didn't even, but in a good way, didn't even think about it. Like, it's like when I told them like nothing changed. And I was like very skeptical about that. I didn't know if, they were going to treat me differently. And they're like, I think if anything, it made us closer. So that's how I knew it was a right fit. And, it was like, at that point in time, it was the right move. That was like the right thing to do is to tell those people. Yeah.
I love it. I love how you embrace it, and it is who you are, right? And so getting that off your back and then being able to share it and get that support from friends as friends should be. Now, I want to say you were going in as communication. Did you change your major or did you just shift into taking classes in, the radio, television, film? How did you do that?
Yeah, so I was a communications major, and it was my sophomore year where I took that dreaded statistics class that I brought up earlier. And I think, after that, I realized like I wanted to make a switch to film, but it was interesting when I first like switched into film. I kind of just thought like, oh, I'll get my my bachelor's in film. And I'll be set. I can be like a screenwriter. I had no clue how the industry worked. I thought like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get like the degree, and then I'll go like be plugged in somewhere in Hollywood writing for like NBC or something, right? Little did I know that was not the case. And it took me a year. The first year I was in the film program, I just kind of blew it off. Like I did the assignments and stuff and watched them and enjoyed the movies and stuff, but I was just like, it took me another year to realize, like, talking to people who actually did production stuff, which I had, I thought I would one up because I would just like film, but, I realized like, oh crap, I don't know anything. I don't know anything about cameras. I don't know anything about sound. I don't know anything. I still don't know, but like, I really didn't know anything back then. And, yeah, I went through, I think I definitely went through like some self-reflection of like, do I really want to like take this all on? Because I realized like at that point I realized like, oh, this is a grind. This isn't going to be just like you get your degree and you're set up somewhere nice and cozy. You got to like really work at it. And then it took, a while and like some doubting at first, but then I like kind of turned that into like positive energy. And I think part of that was realizing like, I am autistic. I kind of like inherently have a chip on my shoulder, and I've been through high school and all grade school. I went through a lot, and now I'm gonna I think now's the time, because I'm so passionate about film, now is the time to really manifest that into positive energy and to just take on this challenge and become the best version of myself that I can. And so it wasn't like a right away thing where it's like, oh man, like film is the coolest thing ever, and I'm just gonna like put, dive headfirst in this. It took a while, but I think I'm thankful. If I would have dove headfirst into it rather, I think it could have had negative implications later down the line. So like taking some time and, kind of having some indecision about it really like helped me like realize like, okay, this is like the trajectory I'm supposed to be on. And I'm committed to improving my craft and, building this out and still have.
I love your growth mindset. I love the fact that you're like, I know I have to grind. Nothing is going to be handed to me. No one goes, oh, you have a disability. Let me, no one's going here, make your movie. You have to work for it. I just love the way you approach that, being resilient and knowing that you are going to have to put in the work. So you graduate college. Do you get an internship? What do you do as soon as you graduate?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I graduated, at that point, like I knew I still had to grind, but I didn't want to do the traditional, like, quote unquote grind of like living in LA that, a lot of my peers were doing. And no shade at them. I know that's like it can be a really awesome opportunity. And a lot of my friends have landed some really awesome gigs and have really great careers, but it just wasn't for me. I didn't want to live in LA. It's kind of overstimulating. It's expensive. It's a lot of traffic. And so I moved back to, with my parents in Orange County. And all the while I was still, doing documentary stuff on the side. But I decided to, I was just kind of thinking like, what do I do? To make money while I'm, I was editing a documentary at the time and didn't have a next project slated really. So my mom was like, well, you seem to, I think you'd be really good working with kids, and how you went through ABA, applied behavior analysis therapy yourself as a child. Like, what if you became a therapist at that while you do film on the side? And I was like, okay. So yeah, long story short, I did do that and it was cool. I was able to balance both. I was able to do film, and I was able to be a registered behavior technician, which kind of, paid the bills more or less. And so fast forward, that's kind of what led me to, I didn't realize I would fall in love with like special education and working with autistic children as much as I did. And I think honestly, especially during COVID when, there wasn't much to do or go outside really, like there wasn't much freedom, still being able to work with those kids, like, gave me a lot of inspiration for like film ideas, for scripts that, I don't know if I'll ever be made, but like that I was still like, able to write because of like working with these children. It gave me, they're so creative, and it just filled me with happiness. It filled me with like hope, it's like, okay, like this is like just really cool, a really cool experience. So that's what like, those elements like led me to pursue my master's at Vanderbilt University in special education, because I knew I like know I've always told myself like I'm never going to stop making films, and it might not be like the breadwinner or like the thing that makes me a full crap load of money, even, and especially in documentaries, but I'm never going to stop doing it. But I also to remain afloat, and something I'm also passionate about is working with kids with autism like myself. So a lot of people were like, yeah, but what, it makes more sense if you want to be a filmmaker to do a film like MFA at Chapman or whatever. And I was just like, no, I think I've always, since graduating college and stuff, I'm kind of like not that I obviously love feedback and stuff, but I'm very like I stick to my plan, if I like stick to my guns, if you will. And so I did. And I think, going through that process at Vanderbilt, only, again, it enhanced like my filmmaking knowledge, and maybe not the most like obvious ways, but it also did a lot for my, journey into the special education universe. And so I'm really thankful, and I think it was meant to be that I went to that program instead of a film program.
I love it. I already want to give kudos and a hug to Mom. It's amazing when someone can just be a catalyst and point you in the right direction. It reminds me of my father, who said, you love music and you love education, blend them. And in your case, you were passionate about film, and you were also passionate about changing young individuals' lives, and you blended that. So major good karma to you. I also think it's amazing for young individuals to see someone who is successful, who put in the work like yourself, from ABA to, cruising through high school to college to a master's degree. That is a great role model. And for everyone who said, oh, you're not going to do this, they can look at you and go, well, check it out. My mentor here is doing it. So, and how you shared, it opened up ideas for, different things that you want to create later on or stories you want to focus on. That's absolutely the good karma of changing people's lives. I will tell you, it comes back tenfold. I want to talk about documentaries because I'm the guy who goes through Netflix and just goes and watches documentaries. There is something I love about a real story. I'm curious, on your case, where did the passion and love come with documentaries?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I mentioned earlier, I started out doing narrative stuff. And I think, while it was really cool and was very thankful for those opportunities, it didn't feel like the right fit. I don't know. I couldn't, place what it was. It just felt like something was off. I wasn't great at like communicating with actors, like what I wanted, like it was like in my head, but I just couldn't verbalize it. And then I had a chance my senior year at UC Santa Barbara to take an environmental filmmaking course. And it was already an application to get in. Once I got in and 15 other cohorts, we all had to pitch an idea. And on the news earlier that year, I remember seeing stuff about inmates who were firefighters, but the news never really focused on interviewing them, more so just like kind of showing them in the B-roll of highlights. And I was like, well, this is like related to the environment. It's a more human side, but like it still, comes back. And overwhelmingly, like we all devote and the class like loved the idea. So we went forward with that project and made it in 3 months. And it was like probably one of the coolest parts of my life, honestly, like thus far. Like not only like the project itself, like the product that we put out, but also like the collaborative process. I met some of my people who are still like going to be lifelong friends. We've been friends since we made it in 2018 and have been kept in touch since, just because it wasn't a shared passion for like, telling the stories of these inmate firefighters, but also like the love of like filmmaking and being, something I think that I achieved on that set and that I carry over in all my sets is trying to create like a relaxed environment, and like so much of Hollywood. And again, I know it works and I know it's great for some people, but for me, the intensity of things can kind of overwhelm me. And so I'm very much like, I like to have a laid back set where we're cracking jokes or we're like, oh, there's a train coming by. Like, let's get a shot of that, having that mindset and kind of, I think, being the director and kind of like sharing that, having that mindset, and being relaxed. I think it kind of radiates onto the crew, if you will. And it was just and luckily, I think the product was very good too. Our film Trial by Fire, the short. And so when it's like I had those two things going, like this really great working environment, great and talented collaborators, and then this awesome product, it was like, okay, well, this is kind of like a no-brainer. I have to keep doing more of this. And so, and I did, at first I was like, well, maybe it's just a fluke. Maybe I just got lucky. I had some really good, people on my crew and it was a cool subject. I don't know if it's going to pan out, but like, the second one, the third one come along and they get like generally like, positive feedback and they're getting into film festivals. So I was like, all right, I think I'm pretty good at this. I'm decent at this enough to, keep pursuing it. So, and I mean, it's not just the accolades, it's like, honestly, like being on set, like, and besides the crew, like, it's something I did early on, when I was first doing that film and other early documentaries, I would kind of stick to the questions and I held my paper and I was very much like, I'm asking the questions that I printed out here and I can't really deviate from the script, and I think it still worked out fine. But something I've embraced a lot more now is like having more kind of like this, having a more like conversational approach. It's like, I'll still print out questions, but, I think it's just led to me being happier. And I think the, content being what I think is better is like just having a more conversational approach when I'm having these interviews. And it's like, it's almost like in some of these interviews, you realize you are looking at your watch like, holy crap, like it's been an hour and a half. We've been talking for an hour and a half. But it's the most recent film we're doing, which is actually a feature length of the short Trial by Fire. It's like, it's, been the case for several of the interviews where I'm just like, having a conversation. I'm latching on to like things that they're saying and asking follow-up questions. And then I will lead. And it's kind of cool because, I look at my question sheet at the end of it and I'm like, oh, we just covered this. So it's just a lot more natural than me like going back to this piece of paper. It's like we ended up coming full circle with it. And yeah, that's like the coolest thing for me. And besides the interview, like meeting some amazing families, like getting super hospitality, like from some of our subjects and getting to a lot of stuff you don't see on camera, like, having the crew taking selfies with them or kind of, like playing with dogs that are at people's houses. Like, I just love that shit, like it's so cool for me to be in that experience. And I'm so fortunate and thankful that people are, a lot of our subjects throughout all the films have been willing to open their houses or their residences or their workplaces because we get to have like these, awesome experiences that are on camera and off camera. So I could go on all day about it, but that's like, there's so many things I love about the documentary space. Yeah.
I love how you're just so humble. You're like, I'm kind of good at it. You're obviously you've got a gift in telling a story, and I love that you pitched that idea. I think it is a phenomenal, fascinating idea, and they are heroes who are probably not considered heroes, when they're in prison. And I'm sure they all have stories, and you dive into that. The fact that you also talked about just kind of creating a safe space and a relaxed, having a director who doesn't take themselves doesn't have an ego, and you're making your crew feel safe and comfortable, but also the people that you're telling the story about have to feel comfortable talking to you. And that's when you really get people to share their inner thoughts and it's authentic. And so I love that. So you create that. You starts winning awards. What's the next documentary you make after that?
Yeah, so it was actually related to it was about a inmate dog program up at a prison in San Luis Obispo, and it was actually that's why I love going to film festivals, because I realized that there's like stories waiting to happen, in addition to meeting like awesome people and getting to talk to the audience who pays to go watch your film that, is never going to be in a movie theater again. Like that's already an incredible experience in itself. But to have so it was a lady actually who came up to me when our first film, Trial by Fire, was at the San Luis Obispo Film Festival. And she's like, this firefighting program is like incredible. And the fact that you made a film about it, I just wanted to let you know, I have a buddy named Mike, and he runs, he was a former inmate, and he helps run this dog program here at our California men's colony in San Luis Obispo. You guys should get in touch, and I don't know if anything will come out of it, but, please get in contact. And so we did, and that's what led to my second film, like Underdogs, is we, just meeting Mike and getting access to that story and that opportunity. And it was all kind of fostered by this like film festival connection, So I try to, I'm very, anytime I get into a festival, I try to make it out. I'm like obviously like grateful. But outside of that, it's like, I know that there could be a story waiting to happen here, like either from a filmmaker or somebody in the community or maybe elsewhere, So I think that there's like a real magic to film festivals outside of, the obvious stuff like the networking and parties. And that's all great too. But it's really like, I mean, how many people can say that they, had they got to make their second documentary based off one person they met at, and that's all it takes. There's one person meeting that you don't usually come into in a normal, scenario. You wouldn't run into them in your everyday lives, but, at a setting like a film festival, like it, fosters that conversation. And, that's been the case with, not only Underdogs, but another film of mine that we're currently working on, Extraordinary Character, Same thing. I was at a festival in Birmingham, Alabama, and a guy comes up to me. He's like, "Oh, you're doing a project about this like all-inclusive playground?" Well, my friend runs a all-inclusive theater out in San Diego, and that led to another documentary. So it's really these like it's amazing. I think there's so much like if you will like untapped potential like in film festivals of like projects waiting to happen. So long story short, that's what led to the genesis of our second film and also the film I'm working on now.
So I want to point out some things because there's so much good stuff that you're talking about. Underdogs, first of all, what an amazing title for that documentary. I mean, super cool. Have to give you your kudos right there. I want to explain to our listeners, though, who share that it's very hard to network naturally, dealing with eye contact or just feeling not comfortable. Obviously, you have just, experienced so much and you're in your element, so to speak. But I think it's a great example. A film festival, you mentioned it's okay to have those conversations and people can talk about films and it's natural. That's what you are passionate about. I mean, I'm sure if you talk to somebody in a coffee shop and you were talking movies, you could talk, the entire night, right? That's what you love and that's what you're passionate about. Everyone on this call has something that they're passionate about. If it's animation, voiceover, video game design, setting, lighting, editing. I just want to point out that when you get yourself out of your comfort zone and you go to these festivals and you go to these things where you can naturally network, things happen. And if you're sitting home playing the video games, eating pizza, you're never going to make these connections and the relationships. And it was as simple as somebody going, "Hey, you should meet somebody. I don't know where it's going to go." And like you mentioned, that led to the next movie that you created. So, and then the third one as well, success is always on the other side of your comfort zone. And in your case, it's proof, right? Like 3 documentaries later is because you got yourself out of the comfort zone, traveled to places and went to film festivals and shared your story. So the kudos, I can't stop giving you kudos. I love what you're doing. I want to talk about where do you decide to go and create Blu Star Productions? When did that launch?
Yeah. So, all along, like, I guess when I first started, even when I made my first film, Trial by Fire, I always had this idea of like wanting to do something more, or if I did have a production company, like wanting it to be something more than just like my own films, because I mean, it's awesome, but there's so many production companies where it's just like, we have to have an LLC so we can get like, tax incentives or write-offs or whatever. Like, but it's like, there's not really any like greater ambitions outside of like just, producing your own work. And I was like, it was actually, again, it's a thing I'm so thankful for going to Vanderbilt for, is because I was working, it was after my first year of the special education program. And I was like literally like just, about to fall asleep one night. And I was just like, well, what if I made like, this production company that, not only like is for, showcases my work, but also like, gives a voice to a lot of like other autistic filmmakers who are like myself, or, maybe they're not documentarians, or maybe they're like animators or voice artists or, whatever, what have you. But, like I just got so inspired. It was like almost like one of those natural highs when I had that kind of like epiphany. And like literally the next day I just started calling people and, going to getting different consultations and whatnot. And here we are almost like 2 years later. And I'm really proud of, it's kind of like looping it back. It's kind of like what I envisioned, and obviously it's still growing, but it's like, it's a space where it's not just, obviously it is a forum and a vehicle for my own films, but it's like with our network page, I'm so proud like that we have as many people who have already wanted to sign up and be on a public platform where hopefully, people would be able to, utilize their talents, because that's really what it's about, is like Blu Star is really hoping that there's so many studios, like big studios like Sony and Magnolia, so many big studios, and especially in the LA area, but there's such kind of like little representation in the autistic population. And so like, I know, I want to be leading the charge, and I know there's like other people that are leading the charge, but and that's part of the great part about it, is like collaborating with like other studios and people like yourselves as well. But yeah, I just want to, I don't want to be the only one that like, advocates, but I do want to be like, I want Blu Star Productions to, be well known in the space for being able to empower neurodivergent creators. And again, like, there's on our website right now, there's actors, there's editors, there's everything. It's a great mix of everything. And there's so much like planned down the line, of like things going outside of just like the network or expanding on the network, that I'm just really excited about. And so I'm very thankful that it's like, when I, set my mind to it 2 years ago, it's, we're still building, and it's still kind of in its infancy almost, but there's a lot that I've accomplished. I'm very proud of.
You should be extremely proud. And, it's crazy. I'm curious, did you ever have anyone who said like, oh, this is a bad idea, or that's not going to work? Were there any haters, or did everyone just go, oh no, that is a good idea?
I'd say like overwhelmingly it was pretty positive, and I think, part of that positive reaction was like, because it's like weaving my own story into it. I'm not just some guy, like some random, I am a random white dude, but I have autism. I'm not just some like neurotypical guy, like he's just like trying to capitalize off the autistic population. It's like, I've been through therapy. I've gone through, I have my STIM and everything. And it's like I'm a proud, autistic individual. And so I think kind of like by incorporating that into Blu Star Productions story and kind of our, it's kind of a big factor of it is my own diagnosis. I think that like people being like, dude, yeah, that's sick. Like obviously I did get, there was like, a lot of feedback at the beginning. It's like, which, obviously like I didn't, wasn't unexpected. It's like, I never owned a production company. I never ran a website. I never owned a business, and so I had a lot of people telling me like, oh, I would do this differently, or I would do this. And some of it was really good. And other of it was kind of like, okay, yeah, I'm, thank you, but I'm not going to do that. But no,
I love it. I don't want to cut you off, but
yeah,
the only reason why I asked that question is because we were talking earlier, and somebody said, like the negativity, and when people hate, I use that as a positive thing to, to lift me up. And I think it's a phenomenal idea. I think the fact that Hollywood is got so many gatekeepers that they just keep making the same story over and over on that other side of Hollywood, right? And there are people who need a platform to share their story, and you are providing that. It's extremely authentic. It's extremely inspirational. So it's a fantastic idea. And I love, not everyone has had a business or run a website, like you said. All it takes is somebody to have the vision, and you had that vision. And as it grows, you mentioned it's in the infancy. It's going to just continue to grow. And the other thing I love is you're creating a community where you can collaborate. You're finding other editors. You're finding other, writers, other actors. Is there somebody that has come to you that you're just like, oh my God, this is the most unbelievable talent. I got to foster this person in any aspect, acting, writing, editor, somebody who's approached, Blu Star Productions?
There have been a couple, I don't know if I want to like share names, but there have been like some people that, is actually the Autism and Entertainment Expo, where some people came up to me, and I've followed up with them since. And I've been able to see some of their work, and specifically there's one gentleman who was an animator, and I was like, and I don't know, crap with animation, right? I mean, I do, but it's like, I can't animate anything. That's not my strong suit. But like seeing his work, we had like a Zoom call before before we got kind of connected to get him on the database. Like, and I was like, wow, this is like incredible. This is so cool. And yeah, it just blew me away. And like how passionate he was, I could just tell, like, even without like, like there were moments where like he wasn't even talking, but I could just see like, the passion in his eyes, as cliche as that is. But I was just like, dude, like this is your calling. Like I can tell. And like, yeah, I'm not like an animator, but like just being able to hopefully, by putting him on our network and hopefully getting him the opportunities to shine as he should, because he's so damn talented. And that's only one example. There's like, I met another gentleman who was a screenwriter and shared like a piece of the script. And I was like, oh, this is so, in a great way, this is so goofy. This is so off the walls, and it's like, again, I think it's something, it's like a superpower almost, because I think, in my own life too, there's like a lot of, I'm creative in a way that I think kind of gives me an edge because of my autism, and I think like when I saw this gentleman's script and I saw this other gentleman's animation, and it's like, I think these are, sure, it's like a neurotypical person could draw the same thing or write the same, but like the energy, the passion kind of behind it, and like the way they, like with the script, like the way it was delivered, I was like, this is special. It's like, I think we as autistic individuals have an edge that neurotypicals in the entertainment industry don't. And it's something, again, that just needs to be recognized on a greater level. And I think will be. And, hopefully we're Blu Star Productions. We're part of that wave.
I think real knows real, that expression, right? Like passion can see where someone's passion, talent can see real natural talent as well. So I'm just excited, to follow your career, to follow all of what you create, the platform that you have created as well. Is there a mantra that you say, that you find yourself saying, that keeps you positive?
It's a good question. Honestly, there is. I don't really know if it's a mantra, but it's just like, kind of, you mentioned it earlier, it's not resilience, but just I have this like relentless mindset, and I think that's kind of been put on me because, during when I was a kid so many times in my life. Also, yeah, my dog just jumped on in the background conveniently at this part, but no, sorry, going back to it. Yeah. Like, I have this, this, ambition now, because I was kind of like, with like the Blu Star bio, I was checked into a box. I was told like, you're never going to achieve this. Even when I got first Segnos, like, he's probably not going to, my mom was told like, he's probably not going to graduate high school, probably not going to be able to live independently. And it's like, going, like surpassing, transcending all those like, like barriers or boxes, it's like the whole idea of a box is so stupid. So it's just given me this like unrelentless mindset that like, I'm going to keep going, and I might not like, get to the destination. And like, if we're like, say it's like a route, like the, boy has on like Apple Maps, like I might not get there the quickest way, but like I will get there in some shape or fashion, and it might not like the destination not look like it might have originally intended, but it will still be like some sort of like, finale. But then the thing is, it's not just like, as creators know, it's not just like you get to that and then you're done. It's like, it's just on to the next one. You're always climbing the mountain. I know it's a common phrase, but it's true. It's like, and I know that climb, like I said, that climb to, kind of bring over the same, rhetoric, like that climb might not be the quickest way, but like I will keep climbing the mountains, and there's not gonna be anyone who stops me.
There's no doubt in my mind. And I love, the way you said that too. I mean, obviously there's two roads that can go different directions, and who's to say they don't lead to the same place? Maybe, going to Hollywood and doing it like the others that you mentioned was a quicker route, but staying the course and staying true to your art and understanding that you're constantly growing and learning and becoming a better producer and creator. Amen to that. So I love it. I have one last question, and then I'm going to turn it over to our crew here, and they can start thinking of their questions. Other than not taking that statistic class, because I know that could be a quick answer here. What is the one piece of advice you would give to your younger self if there was anything you could change? And I know that everything has made you who you are, but if there was one thing you could alter or tell a younger Alex, what would that be?
Oh, that's a good question. That's funny. I asked that question in a lot of interviews that I do for my films. I've never sort of asked it myself. Gosh, I think keep pursuing. I think there were a lot of times, and again, I think everything. I'm in the mindset everything works out for a reason. But I think there were a lot of times when I was younger where somebody would kind of like shut down there would be like somebody would shut down a path, if you will, and that was, maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was a friend or something. It would just like shut down an idea and I would just kind of be complacent. I'd be like, yeah, okay. But now I think with the mindset I have now, I think I'd tell my younger self, like, nah, screw that. Don't let those people get in your way. Don't let one person's no, affect your path or whatever. And again, it's like that might mean you get there a different way, but like, don't let it deter you. I think when I was younger, a lot of things, a lot of no's and a lot of like rejection deterred me. And now I'm just like, bring it on, bring on I like the challenge. I like the rejection. It's like, all right, well, yeah, like again, tapping back into, my relentless mindset. Like, I'm just going to like prove you wrong even more. So, again, it worked out. But yeah, if I were to tell my younger self, like I would have adopted that like relentless mindset at a younger age, because I would have told myself like, don't listen to what the naysayers are saying. Just keep doing your thing and it'll work out.
Absolutely beautiful. I love that answer. I'm going to turn it over right now to questions. If I see hands go up, I see Presley right away, a very aspiring writer. Go for it, Presley.
Thanks for that, Brett. And first off, hi, Alex. It's nice to meet you. I am writing on a screenplay for my first feature. I wish I can tell you about it, but unfortunately, it's classified as of now. So I just have one question for you. Which film genre would you love to work on? It could be action, sci-fi, horror, anything. Like, what could it be?
Oh yeah, that's a great question, Presley. I love horror movies. Honestly, like, even though I make documentaries and documentaries are like my babies, horror is like probably my favorite genre. Like, and anytime I go to a film festival, I automatically like, don't make any plans during the horror block, because I know, especially like horror, short horror films, I think are so special, like because of the twist or, the things that you can't see in theaters. But yeah, I love horror. And like, I guess, being a Get Out being a prime example, like that I think when I saw, I had seen stuff before that, like The Descent or The Ring, The Village, and I think those are all equally, those are great movies. But when I saw Get Out, I was just like, oh man, this is like a new era of horror, in addition to like its own genre. But after that, I was like, I think there's been subsequent movies like, with Ari Aster and Robert Eggers, who have like brought on these amazingly like intellectual horror films. And yeah, I'm just captivated by that. And I think in a way it kind of influenced, again, like it's not, a horror movie doesn't represent a documentary at all, but I think, there's structure and there's like, production design, there's elements of it that I'm inspired to incorporate into my own work, even if it's not like direct. So yeah, that would be my answer. I'm a horror geek for sure.
Love it. Great question. I love that, Presley. Josh, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi. Regarding your documentaries, how do you choose a subject for documentaries?
That's another great question. So sometimes it will be, like I mentioned earlier, like at that film festival, like it'll, like somebody will come up to me and tell me like, oh, hey, like, I know this person or this program, and like, I think you should check it out. So it's pretty easy from there. I just kind of already have a point of contact Other times, like for one that I did while I was in Nashville at Vanderbilt, it was my master's thesis project. I was like watching the news, and it was talking about this all-inclusive playground. And I was like, that looks sick. Like, I want to get in contact, with the person who kind of spearheaded it. And I did. I like just traced the sources from that news article, and a couple emails later got in contact with the Karen, who's the protagonist of our film Free Play, who spearheaded the creation of the park. So yeah, it's a mixture, and I'd say honestly it's been a mixture of both. It's sometimes like I'll see something and the same thing with Trial by Fire, I saw in the news, right? Like it's something I'll see in the news or I'll read in a magazine or a journal. And other times it's like, what I was talking about earlier, like I'll be at a film festival and somebody will come up to me with an idea and I'll be like, and I'll run with it, or, they'll put me in contact with a person. So yeah, it's those, I don't really get the thing. There's like components of films that will like come to me like when I'm in the shower, when I'm falling asleep, but there's not often like, I'm not one of those people where I'll be in a shower, like, doing something, like meditating, and it'll come to me. It's more so like, it has to be like, it'll be like more direct,
Perfect. Great question, Josh. Alex, I have to just say it again. You are an inspiration. You are a pioneer. You are changing the course of people's lives, giving them a platform in your documentaries and in what you're doing with Blu Star Productions. Like I mentioned earlier, we are going to follow you. We have some projects coming up that I cannot wait to share with you and get you involved in as well. I'm so glad I reached out. Your story, like I said, is amazing, and it's honest, and you're very humble for such a talented individual. I wish you continued success, good health, and continue to be that resilient individual who just keeps going, because success, you've already tasted it, but you've got a lot more coming to you as well. So what an amazing evening, and I think we're all blessed to have been able to speak with you. So on that note, I want to say goodbye to everyone. Have a good evening.
As we conclude another enriching episode, we hope you found inspiration in the stories shared today. Let's take a moment to honor Yes I Can's role in bringing Breaking the Biz to life. Yes I Can's commitment to empowering young people with disabilities through education, advocacy, and mentorship shines brightly, paving paths of opportunity and dialogue. This podcast celebrates the organization's dedication to nurturing talent and facilitating impactful discussions. Breaking the Biz is more than a podcast. It's a part of Yes I Can's broader mission to amplify voices, dismantle barriers, and craft a world that's more inclusive and accessible for everyone. Each episode is a chapter in our shared narrative of progress, education, and empowerment, driven by the spirit of Yes I Can. Thank you for spending your time with us on Breaking the Biz. Continue to challenge the status quo and share stories that resonate. Until our paths cross again, let's keep transforming aspirations into achievements and infuse every endeavor with optimism. Here's to advancing the landscape of the entertainment industry, one episode at a time. I'm your host, William Felber. See you next time.